How clean can we get it is still a big question that we're all struggling with, given all the activity around here. It's going to take everybody doing their part to make it a reality.
Message from the State Department of Ecology there about the Duwamish River, a message that has been echoing for decades. That actually came from a piece I put together on Seattle Channel more than 8 years ago. And this week, the city of Seattle is taking some action on this literal mess of a story. That as city budget deliberations continue, plus a potential bombshell case for the state Supreme Court and a story about traffic tickets that's putting the brakes on some important safety improvements. Well, don't adjust your dial, folks. You are listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own, and my co-host is the one and only David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I saw you had a serious commuting problem recently, saltwater mist from the fast ferry, rusting out your bike cables. First time I've heard that one. How you doing, man? What's going on?
Well, it's funny. I had to bring my bike into a mechanic, and when I went to go pick it up, I hadn't told him anything about how I travel, and he asked if I ride the ferry because he could see all the salt water had gotten into the cables and stuff. It's a small price to pay. Although apparently Kitsap Transit is working to improve its bike situation so you can bring your bikes inside away from the salt water.
Interesting. It reminds me of like buying a used car from the East Coast, right? And they use all the salt on the
Right.
roadways and it rusts out the underbelly there. Interesting.
Right.
Well, I'm glad you're okay, my man, as always. And I appreciate you being with me here. Thank you, David. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. Our shout out of the week goes to Brian G. Coming up on his 1-year anniversary of becoming a patron. Thank you for the support, Brian. And if you're listening out there and not a patron, get with the program here, folks. We're here to break down all the local headlines that are going on in Seattle. And also, we're here to answer your questions about city politics, too. We love to have people connect with us. Plus, for just $5 a month supporting the show, you can join the Sticker Club, get your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. Wow. Our patrons send in photos of those decals. We feature them as our sticker shots of the week, which you can see on Converge Media. Converge airs the video version of our podcast Wednesday nights at 7. Thank you, Converge. Thank you, Brian G. All right, let's get this party started with right here, right now. Well, we begin with a case getting a hearing before the Washington State Supreme Court on Tuesday. Potter versus the city of Lacey, so down south of us in Thurston County there. Some background here. The city of Lacey passed an anti-camping measure back in 2019. Part of it focused on RVs. The law said you can't park them for more than 4 hours at a time. Jack Potter was living in one behind Lacey City Hall. He sued the city, saying the city violated the constitutional ban on cruel and unusual punishment and search and seizure, as well as his federal and state right to travel and free movement. Now, the Ninth Circuit Court actually heard this case before and basically said, hey, before we talk about this at any sort of federal level, the state needs to figure out its own constitutional grounding on this. So Washington State Supreme Court, have at it. And David, I think this case could have some pretty wide impacts in our state, no matter which way it goes. And it really had me thinking about what it means to have the courts getting involved, which is happening a lot more often now in these homeless policy decisions. I think there are a lot of different cities around our state who are, quote, dealing with homelessness by passing anti-camping measures like these parking bans. Are the courts the place where new policy is going to get created? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think we've seen a series of decisions related to homelessness, but I think you could also sort of broaden out to maybe the Blake decision around felony drug possession.
Sure.
It's not. I think what we're seeing is the courts basically saying, look, it's not our job to figure out the policy. We're just sort of answering basic constitutional questions.
Mm-hmm.
In the past with, in Boise, this was in the state Supreme Court, but the Boise
the
case. Martin, I think is what it is,
Yep.
Which basically said you can't criminalize people if there is no alternatives. I think the one in, Grants Pass might go even a little further, basically saying, I think, I don't know the details of that one. Maybe you know better, but I know it's sort of related to that.
Right. Yeah, it's another RV type of situation there with Grants Pass as well. But I hear
Right.
what you're saying. It's basically the courts are saying, okay, here's the law, and it's up to you cities to kind of sort it out. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, it seems like it, and there's cities have chafed against this. I mean, our own city attorney wrote an amicus or signed on to an amicus brief to the Grants Pass case, basically pleading with the court
Right.
to not tie their hands when it comes to clearing homeless encampments. It
Yeah.
seems like this kind of fits into that. I it does perhaps put cities in sort of a difficult policy place, but federal judges at any level are not that uh, they're not that friendly to arguments from
Mm.
cities saying this is hard.
Yeah.
Don't rule this
Right.
way
Right.
because this is going to be really hard for us. They don't care about that usually. They say, well, look, I mean, that's not our job to. You got yourself in this position, and we're saying it's illegal.
Hmm.
Um, just because it will be hard for you to get yourself out of it. That's not really my problem, is the tendency of judges to say. And I think we've seen that in some major decisions lately. So, I don't know where this case goes,
Yeah.
but with this particular Supreme Court, I don't think I don't think it would be wise to predict one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. The U.S. Supreme Court is one animal. The Washington State Supreme Court leans a little bit more progressive. So we'll see where it goes for sure. It almost makes me think, David, too, of the sidewalk issue in the city of Seattle
Yeah,
and the federal consent decree there. And hey, you got to fix these things. And the city is definitely taking its time on that. And
and
I think just
and
kind
the
of
True
going
Blood.
further, yeah, True Blood as well with mental health. Absolutely. I guess just with this Potter case here, I just in looking at what actually happened out of it. So this law, they said, hey, you're breaking this. So most of the group went just over the border into the city of Olympia. Eventually, they were placed into safe parking, some other housing options there. So one city's ban turns into another city's need to expend resources. And this is just where the court rulings get really limited here in terms of I guess what it dictates cities can do and how they're actually going to respond to it.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think part of the reason this is so untested is because we've just never really, we probably have to go back to the 30s to find any kind of
Yeah,
precedent for the amount
like
of people who are,
Hoovervilles, right? That kind of
yeah,
thing. Hmm.
exactly, who are living outside, and um, it is really sort of pushing and redefining the definition of a home, and
Mm.
how you define what a home is. It's more than symbolic. If a home is a tent or an RV, suddenly those people who live in those are entitled to a lot more legal protections. And we just, it's been a long time since we have seen so many people who live in places that, until recently, we might not consider them homes, but some,
Yeah.
how the court defines that is going to dictate a lot of policy.
Yeah, boy, this is such a it's a big case. I know that we're going to be watching what the state Supreme Court does with this. Again, this is a court at the state level that gets about 1,000 requests to hear cases every year, and they only hear about 45 of them. So there's a big ticket item here. We'll be watching what happens here, and I know the rest of the state will be as well. It's all impossible stories here today, David, and I wanted to make sure I moved on to our next topic here because it's something on the Seattle City Council's docket this week. They're on a bi-weekly meeting schedule now, folks, now that they're working on some of these budget issues. But a few important items do need attention for the city, like the ordinance the council is talking about on Tuesday for the city to enter into an agreement with the State Department of Ecology to do some environmental investigation and cleanup at the Duwamish Waterway Park site. Now, backstory here. The city's had a park in this area since 1975. This is just north of the South Park Bridge, so not quite into downtown South Park yet. Soil samples there have shown that the area is contaminated with all sorts of stuff: arsenic, lead, some carcinogenic hydrocarbons as well. The city has worked to put some clean fill dirt in this area over the past couple of years, but the state is worried that might not be enough to deal with the underlying environmental problems at the site. So it's time for what is called an agreed order between the state and the city. And as of right now, the city is putting in about $500,000 per budget cycle every 2 years into the cleanup. This new ordinance that the city's working on this week says, okay, these costs could be a lot more. And here's one of the most hopeful lines I've seen in a while in terms of city legislation. The city will allocate more funding, quote, through a future budget process. Who knows what that means? But David, I wanted to bring this up because the Times recently actually reported on what's going on with Duwamish on a larger scale here. Cleanup costs that could top $1 billion, according to the Port of Seattle. Federal officials say it's closer to 340 million. And this question is, and always has been, who's paying the bill? Should it fall at Boeing's feet, the company connected to a lot of the industrial waste found in the Duwamish there? Is it cities like Seattle? Is it the state? Is it the port? I just wanted some of your thoughts, David, about this continuing ecological nightmare on the Duwamish. Some of these old battles really seem to be surfacing again as the city kind of tackles this week.
Yeah, for sure. I thought the story about Boeing was really good and interesting. I it sort of reminds me a little bit of it, on a smaller scale of some of the lawsuits around, I would say, climate change, or even um, I think climate change is a good example, because it sort of depends on um, it kind of depends on what Boeing knew and kind of when they knew it, that sort of thing. Because
Right.
a lot of the
These were the
chemicals.
best ecological practices at the time and things of that nature.
Yeah, because a lot of the chemicals, most of the chemicals, not most, but a lot of the chemicals that are found in there have since been outlawed. But they weren't for a while. They were legal for a while. So one exhibit in the lawsuit is a magazine article where Boeing kind of seems to maybe acknowledge some of the harm of these chemicals, and that other people will deal with it later. Boeing kind of counters that that's not really what it was saying, but it kind of, I think, shifting the responsibility. The state, of course, and the city, of course, would love if they could shift the responsibility onto Boeing to deal with this big cleanup. Doing so, though, I think will require sort of perhaps proving intent and knowledge, and that gets a little trickier.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's interesting when you talk about all these different players here. The Port of Seattle actually filed a lawsuit against Boeing last year and then ended up withdrawing the suit in June of this year. And their big concern there, and it continues to be, these different agencies, I think, trying to protect their resources and taxpayers there against this kind of ongoing costly lawsuit. It's one of those deals where, okay, we're partially responsible, but determining what part does the city need to play? What part does the port need to play in this? And why shouldn't Boeing pay more? This is the kind of rationing, I guess, that's going on behind the scenes with some of the deal making going on here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it seems like to me. It's doesn't appear that it's going to be resolved immediately. I mean, it's I wouldn't be surprised if they end up spending millions on the court cases before they even get to spending the millions on the actual cleanup process.
Yeah. There's so much to work with here, and I've done a few different tours of the Duwamish, and I know that there's a lot of work going on there. Work that's going to begin in earnest next year in terms of this cleanup. We're talking about something that is legitimately one of the largest Superfund sites in the country. So there's a lot still ahead with this, and I'm glad we touched on this. And I'm not quite sure what this means for the city of Seattle in terms of its involvement in this going forward, but I know it's going to be a big price tag regardless. So that's something to watch in the budget over the next couple of years too, as well, folks. So we'll keep an eye on that too. All right, what's going on here? Up next, we're talking about Governor Inslee, who is pumping up a new proposal for wind energy off the coast of our state this week. What's he talking about? What's at stake? What are some of the risks involved? That's coming up on Now Hear This. Governor Inslee comes to Seattle this week to celebrate the launch of the Blue Wind Supply Chain Initiative, a public-private partnership to work on the Biden administration's goal to generate 30 gigawatts of energy from offshore wind by the year 2030 to help out about 10 million people with power. The Northwest Power and Conservation Council spoke with TVW's The Impact earlier this year about the power issues just in our state. The council reported that by the year 2027, with our existing power generation sources, we essentially won't have enough power to supply the growing demands for power in our state.
Today's power supply isn't adequate for 2027's needs, but of course, we have our power plan, the Northwest Power Planning Council does. Utilities have their plans for adding power supply. And if we deliver and execute on those plans, and we keep our eye on growing loads and electrification and how the system is developing, this is the challenge we can meet, but we can't do it sitting there with our arms folded. We got some work to do.
That's Casey Golden of the Northwest Power and Conservation Council there. And David, I wanted to bring this up because Governor Inslee is clearly excited about renewable energy, a foundational element of his time as governor. But this whole wind energy piece isn't even in his climate budget, which is important to point out. It's almost like we're so early in this process, it's very difficult to say what the impact of this type of energy could be. But Inslee is definitely interested in this and kind of seeing a window of opportunity maybe to get some companies to invest. How do you look at this concept of offshore wind power?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if Washington has anything, it's a lot of coastline. I think, um, I don't, I imagine, we were talking about jurisdictional challenges with the Duwamish. I
Yeah.
imagine that there will be some of that sort of conversation here. But, my understanding is this is kind of emerging from, there's this, I guess it's a nonprofit. I can't remember if it's a nonprofit or a 501c4. Regardless, it's, kind of a consortium of maritime
Yes.
based companies and advocacy organizations that come together to sort of push for marine investment. And
Hmm.
they seem, they've been a voice on things like ferries and the shipping industry and stuff like that. But
Sure.
they're putting their voice behind that. I mean, that's a fairly powerful group of people. The
Hmm.
the head of it used to be the head of the commerce department, I think. Well, whatever it was, he was a fairly senior person in the Inslee administration, so has a
Okay.
close relationship with Inslee,
Got it.
and has connections there. And this feels like something that's right up Inslee's alley. And also, I'm not saying it won't come to fruition, but it certainly won't come to fruition in the next year when Jay
Yeah.
Inslee is governor. So, there's not a lot for him to lose to come out and say, yeah, this is a great idea. And, it's not really
Yeah.
going to be up to him to deliver on it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And it's interesting when you talk about that jurisdictional thing. It's okay. Here's the state waters. Here's where the tribal concerns come in. Here's where federal waters begin. I mean, where do you actually place these things? I think that's a piece of it. And then I think the environmental impacts, that's the big question mark. How do they impact fisheries potentially, for example? There have been some offshore wind projects proposed in California and Oregon. They've been halted over these concerns. It's almost like we're so early on with this. I think there's a lot of excitement about it and certainly a lot of pressure from the feds to make something happen by the year 2030. But balancing these things over the span of time, I wonder if even this is going to get off the ground in 7 years. This is such an untested piece, I guess, in terms of what the different energy brokers around our country have done before.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds appealing because, one problem I think that windmills onshore have run into is, frankly, NIMBYism. People who don't want
Yeah.
them on their property or in their sight line. And so, if you could get them offshore, in theory, they're kind of out of the way a little bit, and they are capturing more wind, less to get in their way. But yeah, again, I'm not a maritime lawyer, but I do think that, and I think uh, the engineering on that is a little more difficult too. But there are places that do this. I think. So I'm pretty sure there's some in Scandinavia or something.
Right.
So it's not brand new technology. It could be done. I mean, but this is the United States. We're really good at dragging process out and not actually doing things.
But you got that right. Yeah, I'm really interested to see where this is going. You're right. Not a lot of political capital needs to be expended from Jay Inslee here. This is right in the middle of his playbook in terms of working on issues like this. But we'll see where this goes because, as I say, the states of Oregon and California have had some stutter steps in getting this started, but clearly a lot of pressure from the feds to make something happen here. So, well, guess what, folks? We've been covering so many big dollar, impossible issues this week. I couldn't resist the urge to throw one more in the mix, a resolution in front of the city council this week declaring the city's intent to recognize that unreinforced masonry buildings, here they are again, citywide, they need to get in compliance with the city's URM retrofit technical standards. So this follows a resolution in 2021 that set up this standard in the first place. The new discussion this week, hopefully giving some transparency to building owners that the city is working on an actual ordinance on this URM issue. They want the involvement of different developers around the city. And David, I think this legislation brings up an interesting issue. Yes, this is expensive work, absolutely. But it's not that building owners simply don't want to pay for this. They're often hesitant. The legislation even says this. They're hesitant to do upgrades like this because they don't know if the work they put in will actually meet the standards the city puts in place in the future. Basically, they don't want to spend the money now if they won't be in compliance down the road. When you think about this resolution, David, what does it have you thinking about?
Well, it's funny we're talking about this now. I was sitting on the couch. I think it was it Monday night, I guess. No, Sunday night. And our whole house shook, and we felt a little
Mm,
earthquake. And
yep,
it,
yep.
it was I think a lot of people out in the region felt it. It wasn't big, and it didn't cause any damage, but it does kind of get you thinking about these things. That this isn't a
Oh yeah.
hypothetical situation. Um, you know, the back and forth on these unreinforced masonry buildings just feels endless. Frankly, feels like it's kind of fallen into one of those categories where I will believe believe action when I see it. But I mean, it's a my understanding though is I think it's tough. It not doing anything causes issues too, because if you
Right.
own a building, say in Pioneer Square, and you want to make renovations to it, if you make significant renovations to it, you're going to have to bring your building up to code, which bringing it up to code means making it, reinforcing it. And so,
Hmm.
by not having this work done, it it it's not like it's just kind of going away,
Right.
certainly. And so, I think that's a fair point that standards could change, but at the same time, there's a lot of academic research out there at this point. I think my sense is we have a pretty good idea of what it takes to reinforce a building to keep it from falling down in an earthquake.
I think so too. And the other cost, if you want to look at it this way, the city is even saying in its legislation here, Seattle has an 86 chance of experiencing a big time damaging earthquake within the next 50 years. And that might seem like a long time off, but I don't know, just kind of playing the actuarial odds there. This is something that carries some huge costs in terms of what could happen to the city. Remember what happened with the 2001 Nisqually quake, what happened to the viaducts, some catastrophic damage happening around the city here. So you delay implementation of this, and we've got increased fatalities and so forth down the line. But it just feels like one of those issues, David, maybe like the tree ordinance, which was dragged on for so long, right? I mean, years, decades, as a matter of fact. And I wait till you get on the ride for unreinforced masonry here. I'm trying to figure out what sort of political will it's going to take to craft an actual ordinance on this whole unreinforced masonry piece. What council member wants to take on this political roller coaster? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, expensive preparations for future emergencies that may or may not happen while the elected official is even
That's just
alive,
not sexy. Yeah.
let alone still in office. Uh, by the way, a thing that no one's going to be happy about. If all goes well here, no one will say anything. If things go
Right.
poorly, then you've got a lot of angry property owners yelling at you. So it's just sort of the perfect issue. It's the perfectly wrong issue for the way that our political system is set up, because
Yes.
it's just there's no upside for anyone who's been elected to Seattle City Council to make this their big issue. Of
Yeah.
course, it will become a big issue if and when there's a large earthquake and buildings fall down and people die.
Oh yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
our political system is fairly well equipped to respond to mass death and emergencies, not well equipped to prevent those things from happening in the first place.
Ah, so true. It makes me think of Councilmember Alex Peterson talking about how he wanted to make bridge repairs sexy again. That just didn't work out for him. I'm sorry. He really
No,
he was
no.
pushing that, but it just never. It seems like a similar kind of issue to me.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, coming up, we got a lot more to talk about here, folks. Traffic tickets. You know, the city of Seattle has had some trouble collecting on these, but did you know what that means for the city's traffic safety budget? Find out more. David's going to break it down. It's coming up on Transportation Talk. God, this camera thing is loads better, man. We can even slightly interact, which is great. Um, all right. Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2. David, you recently followed up on the story in the Seattle Times about a piece you did about expired traffic tickets in the city of Seattle. So here's what David's talking about, folks. Since 2021, 100,000 automatic traffic tickets issued to drivers in school zones and red lights were not reviewed by the Seattle Police Department in time, and therefore They expired without the city collecting the dollars there. The penalty didn't happen. This is having an effect, as we understand now, on the city's budget process, it appears. David, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, the impact is not, it's not over, you don't want to overstate it. I think it's 4 million this year, although, the projections for the revenue that these cameras would bring in through 2027 is going to be revised down by about $14 million. So that's not nothing.
Wow. Yeah.
But I found it almost more than the budget impacts. I just found it interesting for the implications, because automatic enforcement, camera enforcement like this is really kind of having a moment in a way, because
become very popular.
Because of sort of three things, really. Not as many police who are not pulling as many people over, a traffic safety crisis out there, and sort of concerns about low level traffic stops leading to violence or bad interactions between police and the people they've pulled over. And so in theory, automatic enforcement kind of takes care of a lot of those things. But if there's at least for now, well, and there are plans in theory to expand automatic enforcement in Seattle. They wanted to increase the number of school zone cameras from 35 to 70. There are plans to put cameras in racing zones. But if these tickets aren't being reviewed in time, and Seattle Police Department is blaming staffing issues on it, that kind of presents a problem about how low the ceiling is on the number of tickets that can go through this system.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess I'm trying to figure out how you change that trend. I mean, is it a matter of trying to bring more officers on, or what kind of solutions are we talking about here, if any?
Yeah, I mean, there's that. Bring on more officers. That's the Seattle Police Department's kind of preferred approach. There's some thought too. I don't know if there's if there's actually a bill out there, or if there's any real momentum on it. But some thought would be remove police from this process entirely, saying basically, do we really need police to actually be reviewing every one of these tickets? If the answer is no, then that could speed things up a little bit. I would think that somebody would need to review them eventually.
Would it be like a court magistrate or something like that would do that, or how?
Yeah,
I don't know. Might work. Yeah,
I don't know. Probably somebody with, I don't know if it's an attorney or paralegal magistrate. I don't know, but somebody would need to sign off on them. I guess the thought being it's easier to find, it's sort of hard, particularly to find police right now. And so maybe you could find somebody a little more willing and probably a little cheaper to do this work. So yeah, the number of tickets coming from these cameras seems to have gone down a bit. I mean, and that's kind of the point of these cameras. These revenue sources are not intended to be sustainable in a way. I mean, it sort of fits into that realm of sugar tax or soda tax, where if the thing is working, the amount of money coming in will go down. And there's some signs that is happening, that people are learning which are the camera zones. So long term, it's a source of revenue that the city was expecting to decline, but they just didn't think it would happen so quickly, and didn't expect that it was going to happen because of staffing issues.
Right. Oh, and it brings into play so many different pieces there. We're talking about a Seattle Police Officers Guild that hasn't had a contract for so long. So how does this staffing issue work into what they're talking about? It's just such a very interesting narrative around police hiring that we're talking about, certainly with candidates. If you want to check out any of the debates that I've been moderating on Seattle Channel, please do, because they are all talking about police hiring. And is it even possible to hire those 400 officers that the mayor wants to hire to get the department back up to 1,400 officers? I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this, David. I'm really glad you broke that down with us, and we'll see what happens with that budget deliberation as the city continues with that throughout the month of October into November. Remember, there is a public hearing coming up on October 18th if you want to sound off about the city's budget too. But it is time to wrap up the show, David, and I wanted to ask the question that I think about during this time of year every year. Should we abolish daylight savings time? Yes or no? What do you got?
I'm in the yes camp. But
which way do you want to go? Do you want to stick standard time, or do you want to stick with like daylight savings time?
I want to stick with daylight saving time.
Yep.
I want it to be, I don't want it to get dark at 4:30. I think. Although that said, now that I have a kid, he wakes up at like 5:15, and we're just sitting in the dark for 2 hours. So I won't be totally mad when the sun is rising a little bit early. But mostly I fear, because he's already getting up at 5:15. So if at this pace, when we do daylight saving time, that means he's going to wake up at like 4:15. So
oh boy,
we got to figure that out.
Yeah, that's the David's kid proviso. We got to work into the language here of any deliberation. So we'll see what happens there, man. Yeah, I just remember this from my days back working for Q13 when it was still Q13, and waking up at 2:30 in the morning to get in for that morning shift. And it's like, oh no, am I actually waking up at 1:30? Different times, but anyway, I'm glad glad those are through as well. David, thank you as always for joining me here. Thanks to everybody who's listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.